to our pod, and by that I mean on Wednesdays we read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are usually two best friends who do a deep dive into a new book series, one book at a time. But today we are
We're three best friends.
because we are welcoming to the pod Bryan Wilson. Bryan Wilson is the author of the Power of the Stars series, a space opera that follows Colton Sampson. The first of which in the book series is The Forsaken Planet. Bryan, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I appreciate it.
Of course. We just finished reading your book. It was a romp of a book. Can you tell us a little bit about your series?
Yeah, so the series is called Power of the Stars, and it's a science fantasy space opera. Reviewers have likened it to Ender's Game meets Star Wars or Ender's Game meets Wheel of Time. It was very purposeful of me to try and do my best to make it a 50-50 genre split, genre blend of science fiction and fantasy. And it's a story of a group of friends, college age guys, and basically it starts off set on our contemporary world on Earth, and alien space fleet arrives in the skies, and kind of just an attack occurs. The characters get caught up in it, and it kind of turns our world completely upside down. They learn there are multiple other planets out there where humans live, because that is what the alien fleet is. They're human, and there's a reason they left Earth in the dark. There's all worlds, cultures, and there's this kind of ancient cataclysm that connects these worlds to Earth that happened millennia ago. And the people also are able to control a power called Solera. It's the magic system in my story. Everyone outside of Earth can use it, so it's completely ingrained into their society, their tech, their culture, all that stuff. And yeah, there's just this massive power struggle going on out there, and that's what our characters kind of get pulled into when the attack occurs.
Love it.
I like the different mixtures. I will also say that for me, as someone who grew up with the Star Trek universe, I thought all the diplomacy and like all the political talks was very Star Trek-ish. So
yeah, I wasn't huge on Star Trek, but I watched it growing up, and especially the newer movies, I really enjoyed them. So that I'm sure that played into it a little bit.
I'm
awesome.
glad you mentioned Ender's Game too, because I texted Hannah early and was like, this reminds me of Ender's Game.
Yeah, that was.
She was like, yeah, I'm digging that.
Yeah, that was the book I actually read. I read it in high school, and that was where the first glimpses of an idea for this story kind of came into my head. So I would say that's definitely the largest influence of creating the story. And that was way back when.
Well, this is an excellent book for listeners who haven't listened or read it yet. We're not going to be doing huge spoilers, but expect a few spoilies about the plot. But before we dive in, can you kind of tell us a little bit about you as a reader? What are some of your favorite books now? And maybe as you were a child, you just mentioned Ender's Game and Dresden Files off air. But were there specific books that inspired you to get into writing science fiction and fantasy specifically?
Yeah, so I've been a reader since I was 12 years old. My first, I mean, I've been, you read through school before that, but that was in seventh grade. I remember we were assigned The Hobbit, and that was the first book that I went home, and, we were supposed to read a certain amount by a certain point, and I just blew through that thing in the first weekend. So, I was just,
Can relate.
Yep. It kind of changed my life, I guess you could say, because, it just pulled me right into fantasy. I remember going back to my teacher, is there anything else like this? What else is like this? And she just smiled. She was like, well, there's actually a trilogy that's kind of based right after it. So, yeah, I read Lord of the Rings. That pulled me right into fantasy. That was what I predominantly read when I was younger. But then I came to Ender's Game later. I think I was either 15 or 16 years old, read Ender's Game, and that just also blew me away, got me into science fiction. This was the time of Halo was kind of brand new back then, super popular. I was playing that with my buddies all back then. You didn't have the online live games. You had the Connect. I forget what the cable was, Connect and play in different rooms. And we did that all the time. Our parents hated us because we would be 1 a.m. screaming at each other in the middle of the night. But yeah, so that all kind of, those are kind of influences that all gave me the idea of this. And then I've read a lot of the populars. I told you guys about the Dresden Files. I'm a big urban fantasy fan. The Alex Verus novels are also really cool. Um, Wheel of Time is probably my favorite series ever. Just that was another moment. I think I got into it late teens, early 20s. That just the expansive world building and kind of from point A at the very start of the series to where it ends, at the final book, just still blows my mind when I think about one single person kind of creating two different writers, but one person creating the outline of the whole story. And then the last real big one for me that I got into in my 20s was Red Rising, which I had finished the draft of The Forsaken Planet, the first draft of the first book before reading Red Rising, but it definitely plays a major influence on my work. It's probably my favorite modern series. I just finished Lightbringer and fantastic. Um, but but yeah, it's something that was definitely a positive boost to me with that series and reading it after is my story. I always kind of worried the first book is very different from what I had in store in my head for the later installments. And I was kind of worried, is that going to be a problem? That's not, back in the day that you wouldn't see that a lot with trad books and trad publishing. And there's a very different tone. The first book follows majority one singular character, Colton, whereas the later books open up more. You get different characters going off, doing different things. You're exploring different worlds in my universe. And I kind of worried, is that going to be too much? Is that going to be jarring? Is that going to throw it off? And, then when I read Red Rising, anyone who's read it knows the first book is very different from the second book. And to me, I love the fact that you get the world building in Red Rising, but you only really see about like 10% of it. And then it just kicks into a different gear in the second book. And that's very much the comparison. I've gotten that comparison quite a bit to my series of it's the same exact thing, where the first book is very much kind of a training novel and we're establishing these guys from Earth into this. We're building the brotherhood that forms amongst them with, kind of battle training sequences and stuff. And then the second book is like they're shot out of a rocket ship and thrust into everything.
That's
Well,
awesome.
that's interesting because Hannah and I think we both own Red Rising and we haven't
We
read
do.
it.
Really?
Yeah,
I was about
I
to
think
say,
it's both for us, both of us were like on the edge of like, oh, Red Rising is here. It's like always orbiting around us. Like we could pick it up at any given moment and we just don't for whatever reason. Maybe it's the hype.
I
Yeah,
feel
But
like
I can't recommend enough too, but I know it's I don't know, that is one series that it seems like it's really hit or miss for some people. I would
Mhm.
say if you do read it, at least give the first, unless you completely hate it, obviously, but I'll try and give the first two a chance because I think book two is much more what the rest of the series is as opposed to book one.
Well, you're really speaking our language on all the different books you mentioned. We did do Wheel of Time, and I see behind you, this is not a visual medium, but you do have all the old covers of the Robert Jordan
Yeah.
Wheel of Time, it looks
Which
like,
we
which
also
are
have.
Laura
Yeah,
has. I
mine are
don't
all
have
the
them, but I'm
originals
jealous.
basically.
It's very impressive. So that's awesome.
Well,
Thank you.
you mentioned a little bit about how you had like this idea in mind for like publishing your books, but can you tell us a little more specifically about like your publishing journey? Because you had two books come out, Forsaken Planet and The Son of the Prophets, within like a relatively short amount of time, and just kind of wondering like what that journey's been like and what led you to self-publish.
Yeah, journey's been kind of a crazy one. Because I kind of touched on earlier, I started actually writing, I wrote the outline and started the draft of The Forsaken Planet in my late teens. I'm 38 years old now, so it's been quite a while since then. I spent years kind of here and there working on that first draft, put the book away. This was kind of around when I got started in the business I do for a living. A couple years went by, I didn't touch it. Then I went back to it. I did a very, very heavy self edit. Probably spent a couple years doing that, and then I had my longest stretch of not even looking at it. It was when I got married, I had kids. That stuff just got put to the back burner. But I think I went about 6 years without even looking at it. And was it 2022? The end of 2022 or back half of it, I opened it up for the first time in those 6 years, reread it biasly. I loved it, and I just said I gotta figure out what I have here. I know I have something I like. I gotta see if other people like it. Spent about the next 8 months developmental editor, beta readers, doing the whole editing process. That was more than just myself. I did my own self edits as well. Did a lot of rewrites because a lot of it written when I was written when I was younger. B, you kind of it's hard to write here, take a few months off right there. It doesn't, you got to kind of connect the story better in that regard. So I spent about 8 months doing that, cleaning it up, and that was when I published. It was, I wish I knew now what I know. I wish I knew then what I know now in terms of publishing. So I was not a social media guy before that. So I had very little social media presence. I really, really wish I kind of got into the indie bubble a little more on Twitter, Instagram, all that. Spent like a year in that before I published. But just to make those connections to help push your book, I still kind of feel like I'm playing catch up with that first book. But at the same time, I feel like I've learned a lot and done well to get it out there. And it's grown a little bit of a fan base, and it's kind of, I've always said it's a long game. I'm hoping to spread it out and a little more each year. And in the terms of writing, the second book just was very different because I wrote that and had it published 10 months after the first book. I did the whole process of drafting and editing and all that. And a big push from that was when I got my first book out there, when people, complete strangers I didn't know, were coming back to me, telling me they loved it, sending me personal messages, this and that. It really gave me that boost to say, all right, I have something here. And I've always wanted to continue this story. I've had so many of the ideas, especially for book two, were in my head for years. That's part of what helped it just flow very easily too on that second installment. In the second draft was it was all up there for a long time. So I got that one out there, and for the most part, the people who have read that one like that even better than the first. So, and I'm currently working on the third installment of the series.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. And 10 months is really impressive, honestly. Like, there's so many people that work for years and years and years, J.R.R. Martin, to get, to get the next book out. So 10 months is really impressive because, we all do have a lot going on and everything too, besides just like being able to dedicate time to write. So kudos.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it helped. My personal business in life was a little bit slower, so that helped give me more time to do it. I made it more of a priority while it was slower. But yeah, it was a whirlwind of the year. By the time I published that second one, I had to like disappear for a few weeks because my head was just spinning and done. I kind of crashed before the book actually landed, so it was a little rough in that sense. But it went well.
I actually am kind of trying to do the final editing on a book that I started when I was around 18. So can I ask you like what changed from like 18-year-old version to like current day? Because I know like a ton changed with my book.
Yeah, no, a lot did change. It was probably, I mean, the biggest part for me was my initial first draft was 240,000 words. And by the time I published, I was able to get it down to 175,000. So
huge.
That was the big one, cutting out a lot of the trim. I think it's natural. Any writer's first book has a lot of that just fat in it, the stuff they don't need, the stuff we kind of personally like, but it's not necessary to the plot. And that would definitely be my biggest thing that was changed in between, but also just kind of maturing the story a little bit. I mean, it works for my first book in the sense of I wasn't as mature when I wrote the first book. That helps in a way because my characters aren't meant to be super mature. They're meant to kind of be goofballs, these young guys that are forced to mature with the situation as it progresses. So it worked in my favor, but at the same time, I still had to mature it up a little bit, the overall plot and some of the character work on it.
Well, speaking of your characters being goofballs, something unique about your story is that Colton has like a really deep connection to multiple friends. I feel like in a lot of books where we have like a chosen one narrative or a hero narrative, you only have about like 1 to 2 close friends that they always bounce idea off of. But here he has like a multitude of friendships and personalities and different types of experience with them.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of what inspired you to kind of look at these different types of friendships?
Yeah, it was important for me because I think an aim of mine when writing this story was I wanted people to kind of relate to them and feel like they are people from our world, and I thought that what would be the really cool idea was you see them in the very early stages as kind of just normal Joes from our world, and by the end, you kind of see them transgress into these kind of space warriors. Aaron Payne from the Biblio booktube channel, he read it and he wrote it, and that's what he said. He's like, goes from average Joe to total space warrior, and like I love that because that's completely what I was trying to go for. I think that'll be the appeal to anyone who likes my story, is kind of Harry Potter-esque in a way. You're going to relate it to what, for me, what was so cool about Harry Potter was it was intermeshed with our world. So I kind of always was kind of like, who am I to say that's not happening, not going on behind the scenes? And so I thought that would kind of be the appeal for ours. And for me, I think what I went with the big group for was I just was trying to relate it to my own experience when I was around that age. I had my large group of guy friends. We were very close. We were basically family for more than I was with my own family for a long, long time. And so that's kind of where it came into my story. And yeah, I was a huge fan. Another big influence was the show Band of Brothers. And so it was very important to me to kind of put that brotherhood that can form in these types of situations, and especially with that they have been friends for a long time on top of it, to make that a central theme of this story. And that stays all throughout. It's a huge part of the second one as well, especially given that they're kind of splitting up once the second book comes about. There's everyone's kind of got their own missions now. There's too much going on for it to stay in one spot anymore. So it's yeah, it was kind of the aim I'm hoping to achieve.
That's awesome.
Bringing it back to something you mentioned, like right in the beginning, I personally like have been recently, I've gone on record saying like, I think that we're getting a little too specific with our book genres here, that we're trying to classify things too much. And I felt like this book like really like blurred the line between science fiction and fantasy really well, because we have these elements of like a space opera, and we also have like the elements of bringing in like this magic system and an urban fantasy type world, but we also have like gods and prophets and this whole mythos there. So I was just kind of wondering like how you would classify your series, The Forsaken Planet, and do you feel like you have like this pull when you're writing towards one genre or the other, like more science fiction or more fantasy?
Um, the golden question there. I mean, this was one of the toughest parts for me when publishing, was like, what do I go with? Even putting like my KDP keywords on Amazon and stuff. I'm like, do I try and go for both science fiction and fantasy, or one and the other? I personally call it a science fantasy space opera. I my goal has always been 50-50. I think if you're a fantasy fan, you can like this story. I think if you're a science fiction fan, you can like this story. I've done some ads and stuff like that. I have found when I try to do ads geared towards fantasy, they get nowhere to fantasy readers. I definitely do better on Amazon with keywords and ads, focusing it more to science fiction readers, and that's probably because the early portion of this book is more science fiction than fantasy. I tried to put a segment in the beginning of it that's the prologue is very kind of fantasy heavy. You kind of read it, you're probably thinking,
Mhm.
oh, this is giving me very much fantasy vibes. I know that threw a couple people off because the cover is more a sci-fi cover.
Yeah.
So that definitely threw some ARC readers off when I first was getting this one out there. But that was intentional, because I just didn't want, then the next 20%, 25% of the book is very much science fiction related. So I didn't want people to start this book, they get so deep into it, and then all of a sudden you're getting a lot of fantasy elements thrown in at you. And I didn't want that to be jarring. I didn't want that to throw people off. I want them to kind of know right from the start, this is what's going on. It's a science fiction story. It's a set in our contemporary world, but there is this Solera power that's out there, and that's completely ingrained into these other worlds, and it kind of everything on these worlds run around it, and that's where the fantasy aspect comes into it.
I honestly like I was very excited to read this book, but I didn't know much about it before I opened it up. So I read the prologue, and then the first chapter came, and it was like a pleasant surprise to be like, oh, we're on Earth. This is interesting. I wasn't expecting it. Like it was a
Yeah,
nice shift of perspective. So
yeah. I tried
I
to
went
go with
in
like
wow.
thinking
that.
it was science fiction, and then I was like, oh, wait, there's a lot going on here.
Well, I was trying to
So
go with like that, that summer blockbuster theater kind of transition that happens. You see in movies a lot, and I think it worked pretty well.
It was
So
beautiful transitions.
Yeah.
You kind of wrote in the bio about these books that the series can be read for like a 16 plus audience. So can you let us know some of the considerations that went into making a science like fiction fantasy series that's accessible to a little bit of a younger audience?
yeah, I I wanted it to be a story that people like myself when I was 16 and read Ender's Game and read some of the series like that could enjoy. I do feel like it definitely, I wanted to intentionally put a little bit of that young adult vibe in the beginning of it, just to, I think, I think what's part of the enjoyment of it is that, and what can help build the character progression is seeing them as kind of the goofballs, as I said earlier, and kind of immature kids. And I think that's how a lot of people will relate to my story is I hope they'll be able to see themselves as, kind of when they were that age or maybe a little younger, acting like that. And the appeal is kind of, wow, now they're thrown into this crazy situation, these crazy worlds, this crazy ancient lore and mythology, and to just watch that kind of go as it flows. And, it was, that was just a little bit of a struggle for me because I there is some swearing in it, and that's why I say 16 and plus. The first book, the violence isn't really too graphic, but there is some swearing in it. The following book, book two, and then beyond, at that point, the tone gets much darker. It's kind of Randall Thor esque, I guess you could say, is just some rough things start happening that these kids kind of lose their innocence at that point, and I think it's natural. I wanted it to be believable. A main goal of mine is to have these characters be believable to our world, even though they're out on these futuristic fantasy worlds. And so I think it's only believable that there's going to be these darker tones, and there's going to be. That's why I threw a little bit of swearing in the first book, because 20-year-olds swear, or the majority, the average kid does, right? So some of these things are not going to occur, and they're not going to be sitting there and just going, darn it, So I wanted it believable in that sense, but I did want it to appeal to a somewhat younger audience that can maybe feel like they're growing with this character, kind of like how I did when I read Ender's Game, when I read especially like Wheel of Time. That was a big one for me. You got, Rand's the naive farm boy in the very beginning of it, and just what he turns into throughout is blew my mind. I loved it. I definitely wanted to kind of give that feel to my own work.
I always think it's really effective when you have things like that. And like you did a really effective job with this, where it's like, oh, it's 16 plus, but like not everyone's going to read all of these books in one sitting when they're 16. So they get to
Yeah.
grow with the characters, and you do have like darker themes towards it. So people know the energy of the future books, but they get to have time with the characters before they hit those parts. It was really effective.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I
Mhm.
appreciate that. In the 16 plus, it's definitely, obviously, this is, I always say, I've had people ask me, oh, do you think like my 13, 14-year-old? And I just tell them, I say, listen, there's a little bit of swearing. It's not excessive. It's not happening every page. And there's violence, it's not, I'm not talking about the person holding their innards in their hands or anything like that. But, there is mention of blood. There is mention of attacks, there is death, stuff like that. So I always say, if you're the parent, that's left to your transgression.
Yeah.
I just put the 16 plus to be safe,
Yeah.
on that end.
My sister's reading the Harry Potter books with her child right now, and he's 8. And so she was like, we have a hard cutoff at 4. Like, because he was, small spoilers for Harry Potter, but he kept going, well, she's like, well, someone, people die in the next book. And he goes, yeah, but like, no one important like Sirius Black. And she's like, okay. She was kind of like,
Not
loved
kind of the
it.
point, but
Yeah.
How did he guess?
I
He
can't
really
talk though. My
pinpointed.
daughter's 6, and I actually this year was trying to get her to start. I wanted to start reading at because we always have an intricate nighttime routine as it is. So I was like, well, maybe we can start reading a chapter a night or something like that. And it didn't get very far. I got
Yeah.
like 2 sentences in, and then she was like, no, I want to read to you. And it was turning into just, she can't read yet. So it was just telling me some story that has nothing to do with it.
Right.
Well, in The Forsaken Planet, your writing actually plays with a lot of tropes in a really good way. And we have like a chosen one, we have a magical school, we have prophecies. Was it tricky for you to kind of breathe some new life into some of these classic tropes that we get in a lot of fantasy series?
I don't know if it's, I would say tricky. I mean, my goal was to take everything I loved from Ender's Game, Wheel of Time. I threw vibes from the Halo games that I loved at the time. The later books throw a little bit of Red Rising more so in there. My goal, I'm already taking two pretty separate genres as it is. My goal was to intermix them. So I felt like that in itself would kind of make things a little more unique, would change things up a little bit. And then you have the addition of the curveball of it being our world involved and intermixed with it. I've always been super interested in the ancient past and kind of the mysteries that we don't know about from way back when, thousands of years ago. And so it was definitely a goal of mine to also, as you, Laura, brought up earlier with the prophets and the kind of ancient, same thing, mysteries that are going on in the lore and the world building of my story. Mixing all that into it, I just felt like combining it all, that in itself made it unique.
I
Absolutely.
I was just about to ask you about choosing to have like the real world Earth in this because I thought it was very unique, but you just answered it for us. So thank you. It's almost like you have these questions right in front of you. Um,
Well,
and
then
yeah, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, along with the Earth, like you did a really good job of bolstering the politics in these books. You're commenting on like the fact that there's a king and a judicial system, in the Ventarians, but you also have earthly politics kind of mentioned and discussed. So I was kind of wondering what went into choosing like a king as a main head figure. Is it more because like the Earth started with more feudal systems, or kind of what made you decide to go with king and judges and things like that?
um, I'm going to be honest. I just because I wrote it so long ago, I'm not even 100% sure why. I think I know a goal of mine was to kind of change it all up. I didn't want it to feel exactly like Earth's, and especially if you get into my second book, you much more get acquainted with the council that works with the king. He's not a king in the sense of his word is all and that's it. It's over at that. That's how everything. There's also a council. I always wanted it to. You've probably seen in the Forsaken Planet. I want everything about kind of our world to somehow have a little bit of a connection to their world. It's kind of a point in my story that they have almost influenced Earth in a little bit. It's they've kept secret. There's the reason for that, but they've tried to kind of keep Earth in their eyes, quote unquote, civilized. Um, so I went with the king for the Forsaken Planet, but he also has the council. So it's almost like these different branches of government like we have on Earth. And I think that was kind of my way of making it more so connected to our story, but be different in its own sense without, I'm not a huge political guy, so I didn't want to go too in depth on the politics. They are very much a relevant part of my story, but I felt that was kind of a simple, easy way to make it sort of similar, but make it different.
Mhm.
And there's other ways that the other world, as the story progresses, you get these other planets. You see them; they have kind of their own little different ways of ruling their societies as well.
So I just wanted to mention the magic system in the Forsaken Planet because it's really cool, actually, and very Wheel of Time-esque, where characters are manipulating this power called Solara that hasn't been used on Earth for like a really, really long time, and it people on Earth don't even realize that it exists. So I was
Mm-hmm.
kind of wondering if you could explain the magic system a little more to our listeners and maybe how you came up with it.
Yeah, it was Wheel of Time, as I've said, was a huge influence of mine. So I definitely side R, side on is related. It's similar to that in ways, but I call it more like think the Force, except everyone has it. And that was another part that I think I thought would be unique and cool to my story was, if in Star Wars everyone could use the Force, it would those worlds would look very different. Probably the way things ran would be different because they would inhabit it into every single element of their society. It was, and I tried to put myself again, I guess to make it unique, I tried to put myself in a mindset of, well, if people could do something like this, that's why I don't know if you guys finished the books in full or not, but like there's a segment where they kind of teach, they don't have to walk across the room to pick something up if they need it. They can just, it's called wielding is kind of the term for using the
Yeah,
power
he's
of my
able to like float
story.
a person around the room and
Yeah.
everything.
Exactly. They could just wield it over to themselves. And so that really kind of just changes very much how people act. And it was definitely important for me to especially intermix that into the combat in my books and the fighting. And, even the weapons creation. One of my favorite segments from the first book is when they go to the kind of military camp, battle school place, and they create their weapons. They wield their power into the weapon while it's being forged during its creation. And that was just something that I just thought it added another element that can make my combat scenes especially more intricate down the road. It gave me more outlets to turn to when I write these things, because it's almost like another shield for them. They can that because their power is in it, it's that sword can stop something on its own, whereas they don't have to dodge out of the way, or they don't have to create their own another separate shield with the power. And yeah, it was just, I guess, as I said, it was about making it a little bit different from the rest. But I think my story overall is trying to make something different, but also something that every single aspect is relatable to kind of a lot of the favorites that are out there nowadays.
So you also have like in the training section of, because there's like kind of a three-act structure to the first book where he's learning that he needs to go away. He's the farm boy learning that he needs to go away. Then we have like the middle section, which is like kind of our schooling and learning about the world section, where Colton kind of has this awakening of sorts. And he's at school and there's these simulation rooms. And I really enjoyed like the imagery in here because we have like basically like a tornado and stuff that can occur in these rooms and everything. What was it like crafting these sections of the story specifically with like the training in the simulation room?
It was, for me, it was just trying to find consistency of how I portrayed the power. To me, I the way I showed, the power is it glows in their eyes, it can glow on their hands. I very much, especially as the story progresses, I link the power to kind of a person's soul. And so to me, I thought it was a really cool idea. If it's kind of your soul, the physical representation of it, then will be somehow related to your physical form. And so I did the color of a person's eyes will be the color of what their power is. And so that leaves us with all these different sorts of colors. And so, like, the simulations, especially, you have thousands of people intermixing and connecting into the same simulation. I kind of thought, how exactly would that work? How would that look? And especially like the first sim where you talked about the tornado and stuff. Yes, they're all connected to the simulator, but they're all in their own separate simulations for that first sim. So that's why I kind of thought it would just be the powers all spinning around. Maybe the similar ones are kind of intermixing and clashing and stuff like that. And that's why when the later ones, when they're all in the same actual simulation, I kind of made it the powers all kind of come together and form an image for to be followed from the outside for people to watch it, because it's all kind of connected, and humans being connected, the souls being connected, that type of stuff is a major theme, especially when you get into the second book and on of that kind of connects this whole lore and all stuff like that to my story.
I dig it.
Yes. So there's quite a bit about family in your story. You have Colton's connection to his family that's kind of throughout the first novel, as well as Willick's family history, who he's one of the Ventarans who we kind of find out has a little bit of a darker backstory as time goes on. So why did you want to show like various representation of like complex family dynamics in these books?
I think just because that's very natural, it's very normal. Colton with his family, it was always important to me. I want the major theme of this first book to be that brotherhood theme I spoke of before, but also just what you will do for your family, what you will do for your loved ones. These guys they're leaving the only planet they've ever known, going to this mysterious, traveling the dark, mysterious space, these mysterious worlds they know very little of. They're taking this huge risk. They're doing it because they are scared. They feel helpless, defenseless. They want to protect their family. They want to protect their loved ones. They want to be able to protect each other. And that was just, I guess I just kind of grew up a person like that. Your blood, your friends, and I've been very lucky to have a very supportive core group around me. So again, I feel like that's how it would be realistic. And that's how I was able to, I guess, put my heart into my story, was just this idea of when I'm writing it, I'm thinking it is my friends, it is my loved ones. And that's been a theme of definitely a lot of my work. This the second book. There's a pivotal scene that occurs at the end. I can't talk about it without spoiling anything, but it's very close to my heart. It's a tragedy that happens. It's very similar to a tragedy my family suffered a few years ago, and so it's just yeah, I guess just to get the feel and the heart into the story. I've always wanted to get make that a theme of it. And I think it's what also will draw readers to the story if they like it. And what they can relate to is just thinking about them doing it for those they are connected with in their lives.
Oh, absolutely. It gives the novel stakes and
Mm.
it makes us as readers understand the motivations of the character. And I think it was really well done. And I also appreciated that at the beginning we didn't like immediately have Colton's parents just like, boop, they're gone. Like it was kind of nice that it was like, oh no, there's gonna be a little bit of conflict here because there's a push and pull as to whether or not they think that he should go on to kind of be a warrior for the
Yeah,
galaxy, really.
he wants to protect them, but there is this whole theme in the beginning of this group came, they did some bad things. We know this war is going on, but they use these powers, they have this advanced technology. The people of Earth are kind of left feeling like kind of like insects left next to these cultures and these planets and these forces that have just looked at them like insects. They've kept them in the dark. They've done it on purpose. And now this kind of battle that's taking place amongst them has reached Earth. It definitely leaves a lot of people scared. And again, that was just kind of trying to make it kind of realistic in that terms of not everyone would be like, a lot of people would be, screw these people. Who are they? Why should we do anything for them? And then you have the fear of a parent watching their child go off. They don't know anything about these worlds. They don't know anything about these people. For all they know, they're gonna take the people off Earth and enslave them. So it's
Mhm.
I just wanted to throw again, as you said, the stakes before. I think that kind of heightens the stakes in the beginning because even as the reader, you don't really know what's going on. You don't know if you could trust them, and it was definitely purposeful on my end. I wanted that to be a thing where like even Willick, he's kind of the mentor figure, but I'll never forget the beta readers that first read this thing were kind of like, I don't trust him. There's something up with him.
Oh my gosh, I
Something's gonna
didn't trust
happen.
him. I was like, I don't trust this guy. So,
And again, that plays. You see kind of the darker side that comes out at the towards the tail end of the first book. You very much get a darker side in the second book, and that again plays as the story progresses.
Well, it's interesting too because there's all these other planets and we get to kind of encounter people from these other planets and there's really a feeling of mistrust and also just a lot of xenophobia. Like the people from other planets, they are scared of people from Earth. They find them inferior. They talk down to them. Can you talk to us a little more about the xenophobia that exists within this universe and why it was important to show?
Yeah, I wanted to get it in there because it is obviously a problem we see in our world constantly. And I think that happens because unfortunately it's human nature, one that we have not figured out a hurdle to climb over. People are afraid of things that they don't understand, things that are not them, or people that don't look like them. And so I just again thought that would be very natural. You have these worlds, they have chosen a long time ago to just let Earth be, leave it on its own. There's obviously reasons, there's more reasons than just this in the story when you read it for why they made that decision way back when. But now, thousands of years later, after the decision was made, I think it would be very natural for, oh, there's that world way out there in the dark and it's not as technologically advanced as us, and they can't use this awesome power that we completely run our worlds by. I think it would be very natural that there would be people upset with the fact that they're coming. It was I had a lot of fun with writing the antagonistic character in the story who kind of is like, views them as almost they're bringing a disease here. How do we know it's because no one understands why the people of Earth can't wield the power on Solera on there. And so they're afraid almost like, what if it's a disease? They're going to bring it here. It's going to spread to our planet. You have others who are just afraid we're wasting resources. Why are we doing this? We need to we have a war coming. We have to prepare for a fight. And we're, training these, I guess you could say, just hillbilly. I don't know what the right word is, but, I don't, but you get my point of that's
Mhm.
how they would look at it. You know what I mean? Of just they think they're inferior, they think they're lesser. Why would they want to go fight beside them with this
No,
massive scale war that's coming?
something I really appreciated about your book was the fact that like lack of access to something and lack of knowledge of something did not equate to inferiority. So you had these
Mhm.
people who believed because they had not used this type of power, they were inferior. But then you have these other people coming in and being like, no, we just needed access and
Yes.
understanding. And then we have just as
Teach us
just
how.
as much
Yeah.
right to be in the room with you for
Hmm.
our own selves. So I always thought I thought that was very effectively done.
Thank you. That was definitely a main goal of mine was, try and portray that because again, that's something you will see in every aspect of life. We have bigotry going on, stuff like that. But if you give everyone the same, put them as a baby, give them the same life, give them the same access to everything, you're going to be amazed at how similar and of achievements I think we all could reach.
Hmm.
And something that is also universal is like flawed characters. And something I notice a lot. Colton is someone who is still growing as a person. He's young, but he has some flawed characteristics that I think could get him into trouble in future books, such as his want for retribution. um, was this something that you're going to examine in future novels? Is like a few of the more like characteristics of Colton that are not
for,
so shiny?
for sure, for sure. And people are so different. So there's so many different tastes and of what is good, what isn't good. I do want that. I always want that lingering in the back of the reader's mind of, it's kind of purposeful. Is Colton being smart here or is he not being smart here? I think he's being a little over the top, but maybe there's something that's going to happen that proves he's not being over the top, sort of that kind of back and forth ball game. But yeah, I just, yeah, I'm sorry. What was the question
Oh
about?
no, there's just like what's going to be examined in future novels with his personality and things like that.
Yeah, it's definitely him continuing to grow, but also the situations and the things that happen kind of forcing him to change character. There will be things that the second book, especially, you see he kind of is set on a certain course, especially after the end of the first book. Events have occurred, and it's only made him more ingrained in his mind that what he was thinking is correct and that's what he needs to trust moving forward. There's other people telling him that he's very close to, I don't know if I agree with this, I don't think this is necessarily the right thing to do, but it just, he's headstrong, it's part of the learning process and he goes for it anyway, and it's going to have its repercussions and it's going to have, I want to say blowback, but without spoiling things, it's definitely a main theme that continues to occur throughout the story.
Exciting. Something I also noticed in this book, you have a lot of like strategy and simulation battle scenes. I am someone who's terrible at writing action and often reading action, but yours was very easy to follow, so I do appreciate that.
Thank you.
But what was it like developing those scenes?
That it's to me, it's some of the most fun. I was that's always been some of my favorite aspects of the stories I read. So it was very important to get it, and I've taken a lot of pride, and that's been a good majority of my positive feedback has been people really enjoy my action scenes. They say what you said; they're easy to read, and I think because I've intermixed this whole, you have space, you have like spaceships, stuff like that. You don't see the spaceship type stuff so much in the first one, but you have stuff like that. But then you also have this whole magical power that's ingrained into the fights. It has left me just with a plethora of options to kind of change everything up and make it fun, make everything a little unique. And then it was just important for me in this first book to really get the strategy on paper, write it out for a point that the average reader who might not even be kind of, might not follow military stuff or might not be into kind of that war stuff or battle stuff can at least they can understand and follow along with it. Just because again, I'm trying to get that realistic nature, and we have these kids from Earth, they go to try and learn this power that these people have been using their entire lives. And I've said after the first book, they really launched out into it. I want it believable that they have come here, these normal average Joes, goofballs, and over the time they have learned to actually be very adept with it and very capable with it, and not just to use the magic power, but to fight with a sword, to fight with with an axe, that, these things that are all very important in the battles that are to come. So yeah, that was basically my goal with it.
I loved that. I also loved the UFOs that you put in here. That was a good little ad when they
Actually, there was like a lot of fun little like tie-ins of things where it's like, yeah, well, why would we have the pyramids and all this? And
Yeah.
I loved some of those things. There's a lot of humor in this, actually.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm kind of a sarcastic person in life, so I definitely wanted to. It's not heavy in my story, but I definitely wanted to get those few scenes thrown in that I've gotten mixed feedback on it. Some call it corny, but it's intended to be corny in some aspects because they are young, immature guys.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's definitely moments where I'm hoping people will read this are gonna laugh out loud a little bit while they're doing so.
Yeah, definitely did. So, book two in the series, The Son of the Prophets, just came out April of 2024. We talked a little bit about like some things you said that the stakes are raised and we have all sorts of themes that are being brought in. It's darker, it's heavier,
Mhm.
and I'm wondering a little more about like the extended mythos and the gods and prophets. I'm guessing there'll be more of that, but what else can readers expect from The Son of the Prophets?
You can expect it. Definitely, it goes much heavier into in kind of the mythos, like you were saying, and the ancient lore and these prophets that are. I mean, anyone who gets to the end of the first book will kind of get that curveball that comes at the end that they're like, "Whoa, I wasn't expecting this when it came to the prophets." That gets built upon a lot in the second book. I'm drafting the third book right now. That gets built upon again in the third book. But also, I think for a lot of people who read the first book, there might be some of the negative feedback I've gotten from the first book is just that there's a lot of world building that you learn about, but you don't necessarily see. That was intentional in the sense of I can't just because I have so many ideas, I couldn't show it all in the first book, but I really wanted to give the idea of what can be with these worlds because we really only see one of them, right? So it's I want there's 11 total planets that humans live on. I want the overall broad picture, kind of like Red Rising. You get the feel of what's there, but in the first book, you don't necessarily get to see what's beyond that wall. He gets put in the institution in Red Rising, and we don't see until the second book the broader picture. And I think that's what makes. I think that's why people with the set, like people are blown away. Some of the people who like my first book then go on to the second because it's really that canon that launches you just out into all of it. You get a lot of the things where I think you might have, if there are things, it's not for everyone, but if there are things that people read the first book and they said, man, I really wish we got to see this, or I really wish we got to explore this more. A lot of those novel concepts do get explored in the second one. We talk, just as an example, we talk in the first one, you kind of learn how Willick can talk to animals. He can communicate with them. We don't really get to see it much in the first book. That is much more explored in the second one. That's just one example of many kind of on that end.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Well, we
Well, I'm
can't
looking
wait to
forward to
read
it.
it. Yeah. Thank you so much, Bryan, for
Yeah,
coming on and
thank you.
talking with us about your book. This was an amazing experience. Before we let you go, can you let readers or can you let our listeners know something you're reading, watching, and or enjoying?
Sure. Well, first, let me just say thanks again for having me. This was a ton of fun. I'm again very appreciative of being on here. I would say reading wise, I've been speaking a lot about Red Rising. I recently, less than a week ago, just finished Lightbringer, and that's the latest book in it, and it blew me away. I'm a huge fan of the original trilogy. Then book 4 and 5 came out years later. It's part of the main story, but it's a little bit separate in ways. And I wasn't so big on 4 and 5 as much as I was the original trilogy. This was the first one that made me feel like, oh yeah, we're back to classic Red Rising here. So I loved it, was blown away by it. Again, I cannot just recommend that series enough to anyone. And yeah, I'd say that's pretty much it.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, Bryan, tell us, where can our listeners find you and your books?
Social media wise, I'm most active on Instagram. It's at bryan.wilson.author. I'm also on Twitter. I'm not as active on there, but I do go on there a fair amount, and that's at B Wilson Author. And then yeah, I'd say other than that, it's just my website, bryanwilsonauthor.com. I actually, if you go to my website and sign up for my readers list there, my mailing list, you can get a free novella that I wrote that is part of the Power of the Stars series. It's a complete stand. It works well as a standalone, but it's also for anyone who's read my work, a complimentary piece that kind of touches on elements of the world building there, but is it perfectly works well as a standalone. I think it's a good representation of my work, and can give you an idea if you'll like the series or not.
Well,
Awesome.
everyone, make sure you are running to Bryan's website and
Sign
signing up
up
for
for
that
that
newsletter.
emails. Yeah.
Make sure you're buying his books, reading them, reviewing them, doing all those things.
Request at your library, all of it.
Always.
Thank you.
Well, we do really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much. You are always welcome back anytime you need a book to, talk more about. We're happy
Book
to
3
have
comes
you.
out.
I'd love to. Yeah. When book 3 comes out, I'll be reaching out.
Sounds great. Well, thank you. And listeners, you know where you can find us at OWWR Pod on all the platforms, or you can check out our current reading list over at ourpod.com. So make sure you're keeping tabs on that. We have some great things coming down the pipeline. So thank you so much, everyone. And join us next week as we get back to regularly scheduled programming. Thank you, Bryan.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.